You're listening to Interzone Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of Interzone and its online sister zine, Interzone Digital. Subscribe to Interzone at interzone.press and read stories for free at interzone.digital. Joining me on the show today is author R.T. Ester, who will be reading his story, The Building Across the Street, and talking about his forthcoming novel, The GANYMEDAN. Hello, R.T. Ester. Thank you so much for coming back on Interzone Pod.
Thank you so much, Gareth. Thank you for having me back.
I'm very excited to have you back on today because you're going to be reading your Interzone 294 story, The Building Across the Street. Hopefully the first of many author story readings. And I thought, just to start off, can you remember the seed of that story, The Building Across the Street, and sort of how it came to be?
Yeah. I had to think about it because it has been a couple years since I actually wrote it. But a lot of what inspired it is still kind of the same for me. I spend a lot of time on the train, and I guess if I had to really think about it, the catalyst for the story came from just observing a lot of the interactions between transit police and the homeless people I see sleeping on the train. I've been fortunate enough that I've had close calls, but there's never been a time in my life when I was living on the street. But Leland, the story's main character, was based loosely on people I've known who did go through that. And once I decided I wanted to write a story like this, one using their experiences as sort of a springboard for the story's more fantastical premise, I guess I knew I would have to honor that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I wrote this back, I think in 2020, my biggest reference point for something like it was Ian Banks and his culture novels.
Mm-hmm.
The building itself is a loose lift from one of those books, and then the alien in this story sort of comports itself the way I imagine a culture ship would after years in isolation, even down to using human-like avatars, which the alien in this story does, in a sense. Yeah, what else? I think at the time I had also been reading a lot about this concept of deep time and thinking specifically about what it would be like to observe it the same way we observe smaller time intervals, like aliens who exist on higher time scales, and maybe a century to us is just a few seconds to them. And in this story, I tried exploring that as well. So yeah, that's just a quick kind of run through of what inspired the story, I suppose.
You've published short stories in places like Clarkesworld. I've published your stories in Interzone and in Interzone Digital, and you have a longer work which we're going to talk about later. Do you find you get more sort of joy writing shorter, or is it more enjoyable for you to be writing longer stories like novellas or kind of or novel length stories?
Yeah, thank you, Jared. That's a interesting question. I would say I definitely enjoy the opportunity to explore more when I'm writing longer stories. And one thing I've noticed about writing short fiction, is that there isn't really a lot of room, at least for me, to world build the way I would want to. Whereas like with longer pieces, like I can kind of, like I can kind of, the way I like to world build, I like to kind of let it, like, slowly um, kind of slowly reveal itself. The world building reveals itself, and I don't know if I figured out how to do that in short stories yet. I think in my opinion, a lot of people who excel at writing short stories, they they draw on world building that's already kind of established from older stories that people have read, and so they don't really have to do as much world building in their short stories because maybe they're kind of referencing tropes that are very familiar to people who read science fiction, who've read science fiction and fantasy in the past. And I would say that I haven't figured out how to do that yet because I'm not as familiar with the canon as most writers are. Most writers who excel at writing short stories. But with longer fiction, with long form, I can kind of, I have room to kind of introduce my own unique take on all these things. Whereas in short fiction, there's just not enough room. And I feel like a lot of people who excel at short fiction, they they don't always have to do that. They can just draw on things that are already familiar with people who speak the same kind of vernacular they do from having read a lot of the same things that they read growing up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so let's get to this story. First published in Interzone 294. Thank you very much for coming on and reading this today. The Building Across the Street.
Thank you. The night Leland met Agent Evely, he had expected her to inject him with a homeless tagging chip. The chip was for adults, able-bodied and otherwise, without proper living arrangements. You could not sleep on a park bench without the chip passing electric current through your body in intervals. You could not ride a train past a set number of stops. Leland had just wrapped up his shift at the building where he worked when she first caught his attention. He was inside the diner across the street, his usual coleslaw in front of him. The diner had other guests, but he could only see them in the corner of his eye as he gawked at the pedestrians through the window beside his booth. Her voice peeled him away from the window after a few minutes of that. Leland, are you familiar with the CHIP program? No, he answered, his hands trembling under the table. He had not seen when she came to join him at his booth. He could not recall giving her his name. She wore an olive-colored blouse under a dark overcoat with the mandated body cam affixed like a brooch to its collar. While the body cam's syringe shape drew his gaze, she introduced herself as Agent Evely with the Homeless Tagging Chip program. They had been tracking him for months, she told him, as he went in and out of the building across the street, as he frequented this diner for his coleslaw, as he rode the trains on endless loops at night, with seemingly no stop in mind. Leland had spent so long avoiding the chip and the forced residence inside facilities tucked away from view of the general public. With tiredness of mind and body, he confirmed suspicions that they had about him going inside the building nightly to clean the office at the very top. There was a fax machine inside that office. Leland confirmed knowledge of it as well. After asking how good his reading was and watching him strain to recall that he read at a 7th grade level, Agent Evely placed 2 items on the table between them. A pressure injector used for subdermal chip insertion. An ancient-looking device Leland pegged after a few seconds as a flip phone. This isn't right, he said, voice going in and out. You're saying how you treat people. The Homeless Tagging Chip program ensures safety for the state's homeless population by guaranteeing them permanent shelter at any of our intake facilities. Yeah, but dig this, he cut back, hiding his rancor at the old PR spin behind a grin. I'm not homeless. He had a job inside the building across the street. He had money coming in, not nearly enough and not always paid on time, but you can take the chip now, or you can leave this diner whenever you're ready and try out running the client engagement drones waiting outside. Leland gulped. Having lost his train of thought, his mind went to the persistent ache in his ankle. Or Agent Everly placed a palm over the injector and slowly slid it back. "You can help us with something, and in return, we'll find you stable housing at no cost to you." She looked about half his age, with a complexion to match his and hair that came down to her shoulders in fine black twists. As to his age, the numbers so eluded him he had to consult his reflection for estimates placing him somewhere in his 40s. In addition to a complexion pitch like night and a gray stubble, a scar he did not recognize this evening ran in a thin line from the bridge of his nose to the top of his balding pate. He had let the last few days blur into each other and throw him off his guard. He folded his arms to stop the tremors coursing through them. "What do y'all need help with?" Agent Everly slid the injector fully off the table, then flagged down a waiter. After ordering Leland a plate of linguine pasta to replace his coleslaw, she dove in. Each night, on entering the office he cleaned, she wanted Leland to turn the fax machine on, wait for a fax to come in, call the number programmed into the flip phone, then read the fax to the people on the other end of the line. Once done, he was to run the fax through a shredder inside the office, then empty out the bin as part of his cleaning duties. On the train later that night, Leland kept his gaze over his shoulder. He shared the car he was in with an amputee rumored to have hacked her arm off after the agency placed the chip too deep in the tissue. In the window beside him, construction and power lines and row houses with graffiti on them crossed his reflection like lines on a heart monitor. A glimpse at it revealed that the scar on his forehead was gone. Panic and recurrent helplessness gripped him from all sides as he recalled the sister he had drifted from over the years. How she had vanished. How she had not wanted to be a nomad like her brother. In his black coveralls, he was like a shadow falling into the office he cleaned when he entered it the following evening. A murk of conference rooms and lounge areas partitioned with glass and surrounded fully by windows that framed the moonlit cityscape outside. The agency had chipped his sister and he hadn't seen her again after that. And now they had caught him as well, threatening to chip him if he did not meet their strange demand. He made for the fax machine as instructed, pressed the button to turn it on, then waited as the device's handshake filled the office with a mechanical hum. Even as he considered Agent Everly's offer of a place to live, all that concerned him for now was avoiding the chip. There was no cover page and no housekeeping to accompany the fax that came in. Leland had to limp toward the windows to see better what it said, and even then he had to squint. He got out the flip phone and dialed. He could get fired over this, but for as long as he had been working here, not a soul had ever poked their head in while he cleaned. His first few hellos were met with silence. When it dawned that it would be all he was getting, he cleared his throat and read. Dispatch 372-983-7059. A sudden cataclysm has befallen our home, the Kerala system. A wave of aggressive radiation sweeping in on the tail of what is now suspected to have been a mass nuclear ejection we failed to anticipate. Of the 900 billion souls who made up the Kerala, we are down to just 2 million. Where did it come from? All signs point to an unnatural occurrence I will heretofore refer to as the event. We are not explorers and we have angered no one. Unlike our progenitors, the Kianan, we never made the mistake of alerting our other civilizations, wherever they may reside, to our presence here at Kerala. And now it appears we who have managed to survive the event must desert our home if we hope to survive long enough that we can make better sense of what happened. In accordance with the Emergency Preservation Code, I have fulfilled my duty in sending out an evacuation advisory to any surviving Kiral who may have become too damaged to make preliminary analyses of what has happened here. I am presently fleeing Kerala at a velocity of 30,000 kilometers per second, hoping to get far enough away from the blast radius in 50,000 years. If any among you out there can hear this, put forward your suggestion for a date on which it would be safe for us surviving Kerala to return home. Kira Alam Akiba. After crossing the street to the diner, Leland turned for a look at the building. He had never seen it the way he did this night. 64 stories with windows that spoke of emptiness beyond the norm for even this hour. soft corners, and a shimmering black facade that provided the city its most unflattering mirror. He caught a glimpse of himself at the bottom. Then a car whizzed by and the glimpse was no more. While squinting across at where the reflection had just been, a knock startled him. He turned to find Agent Evely waving him into the diner from a booth beside its window. As with the previous night, she had purchased him a meal of linguine pasta and had it sitting on the table when he came in. She had an unfaltering smile from the night before as well, eyes that rarely blinked as she pried further into his affair. Lillian told her she reminded him of his sister. He said he used to take the train with her to the harbor to see the send-off parade for Martian colonists. How long has she been gone now? Lillian bristled at the question. It was her who worked for the agency that shipped his sister shortly before she vanished. All he could recall was that they had been inseparable for a time. Then they weren't. The colonists had left the harbor inside ships bound for the moon. From there it would have been a week-long voyage to Mars. Perhaps that had been the place he lost her. Like a child forced to finish a meal, he twirled the pasta listlessly with his fork. Agent Evely offered to get him something else. He declined. We had thought you couldn't afford much of the menu here, but now I just think you don't like to eat. A little bit of both, mumbled Leland. He had been getting by all right on his nightly ration of coleslaw. He hadn't been hungry for real food in a long time. Do you have a place to stay tonight? He nodded. I mean like a place to sleep, Leland. He cleared his throat. I don't sleep. Really? Haven't done it in years. She laid a palm on his forearm. When our little business is finished, you'll have a place to sleep anytime you want. A sudden annoyance whirled through him, but he smiled and waved it away. I'm not homeless, Miss Evely. At least I don't think of it like that. Actually, I have many homes. Last night, it was Pearl Station. Tonight, I might choose the harbor. I get paid pennies for cleaning, but I always make do. She nodded. Together they stared through the window at the building across the street. Lillian's sister would have been beside herself to learn he finally found employment, gainful or otherwise. He had to find a way to reconnect with her. Maybe she could come live with him in this place Agent Evely had promised. Don't forget, she said, grounding him once more with a smile. Same thing tomorrow, then we'll meet hereafter. He spent the night at the harbor. The next morning, he sang for tips from tourists. In the evening, he pulled a new fax out of the machine, dialed the number, then read. Dispatch 372-683-7663. Since the great cataclysm that came unannounced and fell on our home, the Carolus system, 2 million years have passed. The length of time has taken me 200,000 light years away from the destruction, but like reminders of our progenitors, the Kianan, and their misguided efforts to make contact with other life forms, the ghosts of Kerala continue to pursue me. In my journey thus far, I have observed much that I would consider extinction events. Were there entities like us present to be taken unawares the way we were? I have seen signs not of life, but death. Graveyards. Artifacts and cosmic anomalies that have made me repent of my electing to refer to what wiped us out as the event. I continue to await a signal from any among you still out there. In my solitude all this time, I fear I may have lost enough of myself that none of you, should we ever make that reunion at Kirillus, would recognize me. I am in decline. It is a scary thing to admit to oneself, so I have elected as consolation to pick up where the Kianan left off before their extinction. I journey now in search of worlds that may presently be hosts to civilizations kindred to the Kiral or even the Kianan. Kiralim Akiba. Leland stared at his meal while Agent Evely craned another fry to her mouth. It had been easy to dismiss the first facts as a purposeful set of nonsense, something to test his reading ability and perhaps his willingness to follow instructions. Minutes ago, he had read the second, and it had been more of that nonsense. And in reading it, he had recalled his sister reading things like that when she was around. Aliens. Far-off worlds. Whose number is it? He asked, referring to the number he had been dialing. Just keep reading each fax like we asked. Is it code for something else? Agent Everly stood, her plate of fries almost completely untouched. See you tomorrow, Leland. The train car was filled to nearly half its capacity. Taking a spot by the window, Leland shared his seat with a woman in scrubs too big for her. Like many others on the train, she had nodded off. Each time her head bumped his shoulder, he jerked and scooted away. To discourage the homeless from straying too far from the facilities, the homeless tagging ship used a remote connection to administer shock to those who had been tagged. For this reason, Leland avoided physical contact with others he suspected of being homeless. Agent Everly had dangled the prospect of stable housing in front of him again. He had not been able to beat back the urge to know what exactly he was helping facilitate for her, but he had amassed enough life lessons to know minding his business was best. Sometimes he thought he would die before ever allowing a chip through his skin, the mark of it, a tacit acknowledgement that he had failed. Something nagged at him, and he realized he wouldn't stop till he could at least confirm it wasn't his sister on the other end of the line. He fished around his coveralls for the flip phone, dialed the number, listened for her voice. The phone rang on the other end. It took the third ring for Leland to notice the low tone was also coming from inside the train car. He craned his neck slowly to meet the sound. A boy no older than 17 fielded his glance, red hair, lanky build, wolf eyes. At first, Leland thought it a coincidence that the boy lifted a similar flip phone to his face next and eyed the display. But then the boy flipped it open and in thumbing the button on the keypad seemed to get the ringing on the other end of Leland's line to stop. The intercom announced that the next stop was moments away. Leland barely noticed the hand his phone was in falling away from his ear as a chill coursed through him. Still asleep beside him, the woman in oversized scrubs tipped over and pinned Leland with her weight as the train braked suddenly. He had not expected to stop so soon after it was announced. Behind him, the boy had gotten up and was halfway to the exit beside his seat. Hey, Leland yelled, then began wriggling out from under the woman's weight as the boy exited the train. Before Leland could stumble the full distance to the exit, it slid shut. The train resumed its glide into the night. Leland whirled to fix the seat the boy had just vacated while cursing under his breath. The boy had left a backpack on the seat. The following evening, as his shift began, he picked up the latest fax, dialed the number again, then read. Dispatch 372-683-8546. Greetings. Kiralem to one and to all. The cosmos remains bereft of any spark of intelligence save ours, and we are but quantum observers in a dance that knows no beginning while tolerating no predictions on when it should end. Nonetheless, I have discovered a system a million light years from home with the most promising forecast to date of events that may in due time lead to an explosion of life like we know to have previously occurred at Kiralis and nowhere else. I am in decline. It is a scary thing to admit to oneself, so I have elected to stop here on the brink of the system and wait the time it takes for these predictions I have made concerning its potential for intelligent life to either come true or come back in error. I suspect I will have to wait roughly a billion years. Our progenitors, the Kianan, once reasoned that the weight of their loneliness being lifted would be worth the risk of any unwanted attention they may have brought on themselves by venturing out into the void. I am lonely, and I think I would like to hear a new voice soon. Kira Alem Akiba. The backpack made almost no sound when it fell beside Agent Everly's fries. One of the folks you had watching me left out on the train last night. Lynn remained standing while she turned her head to face him. Figure you might want it back. Agent Everly swept her gaze back to the table and the backpack now on top of it. Good evening, Leland. Leland sat after a few more seconds on his feet yielded nothing to dull his indignation. He slid his pasta plate toward the window and glared at her. How much longer do I gotta keep doing this? That depends. You can let us chip you whenever you're ready. But if I keep going, eventually you'll get me my own place. At no cost to you. Her expression was neutral this night, but Leland swore he could see mockery behind her stare. It made him laugh under his breath. Something in all this had to give somehow. "Whose number is it?" he asked. "I dialed it on the train, and it went to the kid with the backpack, but I know it's more complex than that. It's pretty simple. Just dial the number and read the facts." "My sister." A knot formed in his throat. "I know it was y'all who took her." "That's not how the chip program works, Leland." Silence lingered between them. For the first time, it dawned on Leland that there had been no client engagement drones waiting outside the diner the first night. He had left before she did. She had promised drones just outside. "You're not actually with the agency, are you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned for a glance through the window at the building across the street. "Yeah, that's what I thought." He then began fishing around his coveralls for the flip phone. "You're part of something else. There's no house waiting for me, and there's no chip inside that injector you showed me the other night, so I don't actually have to keep doing this." The phone made a sharp noise as he slammed it on the table, forcing Agent Everly's gaze back. She studied him. Something appeared to sink inside her as she exhaled. "They'll kill us both, Leland." The words chilled Leland to the bone. "Who?" "Your sister's safe, but you need to start asking yourself what you can do to keep it like that. They don't see human life the same way we do." Leland's heart hammered. He pinched his eyes together. "They who?" Agent Everly stood to leave, adjusting her hair and overcoat. "You can keep the backpack." "Dispatch 372-683-8701. The inhabitants of the Ley-Renin system who have crossed the evolutionary threshold are progenitors the Kianen once did, presently all reside on the planet Kewilios. Kewilios is a water planet with a single landmass on which the sometimes sedentary Leira live in an arboreal coexistence with their flora and with other sophisticated fauna on land, in the air, and in the water around them. Over the last 300 million years, the Leira have proven themselves to be as resilient as I had hoped, outlasting extinction events I had feared on their behalf while adapting to the geological upheavals that followed. While I remain here on the edge of Ley-Renin's heliosphere, I have begun to target the planet Kewilios with beams containing noises the Kiral once made in unison. It is my hope that after a period in the order of another 300 million years, the Leira will have achieved a level of advancement great enough that they are not only able to hear me, but, should they so decide, come see me as well. Kira Alim Akiba. "Where is she?" "She's safe." "Safe where? What else do they want?" "Just that you keep doing what you're doing." The last 24 hours had been a blink for Leland. He had spent most of it on the train, watching the figures of commuters blur into each other, but not seeing them, listening but not hearing, on two legs, on all fours, covered in hair, bare-skinned. Who are they? They're not like us. Is it them in the story? The facts? A strange and terrifying giddiness seized him where he sat across from Agent Everly. He let it pass out of him in a soft laugh. "You know, my sister used to read stuff like that. Maybe now they got writing it. Is that it? Does she know it's me reading it?" "Everything I know about it, Leland, you know it too." Leland buried his face in his palms. Dispatch 372-683-9427. The Leira sent a party out from Kewilios to investigate the anomaly in orbit just outside their home, the Ley-Renin system. The journey here took them 21 years, and the journey back is expected to take half that with my assistance. A few will remain here, inside the life support drum I built in anticipation of their visit, while the others accompany samples of what they met here back to Kewilios. Up close, the Leira appear to have evolved into creatures of a persuasion more familiar to me than I had expected they would over the last 80 million years. Even before their voyage, attempts to establish contact had been hampered many times by what some among them have now described to me as internecine skirmishes over the looking after of Kewilios. Pray it isn't just my faculties becoming more eroded with the eras as they go by, but I could swear it on Kira's divine sequence that these Leira bear a striking physical resemblance to our progenitors, the Kianen. They have, in turn, described me as resembling a pillar of regolith from one of their system's moons, while marveling at my ability to alter the sequence of molecules that make up much of my corporeal aspect. I want to go live among the Leira. I have seen the folly of the Kiral keeping to ourselves all this while, and, barring objection from any among you still out there, I wish to repent of my oath to never be overcome with curiosity concerning the presence of life at the edge of our home, the Kerala system. Kiralim Akiba. They said nothing to each other this night. They sat, they ate. More accurately, Lydon pushed the pasta plate Agent Everly had gotten him aside and ordered his usual coleslaw instead. Between mouthfuls of it, he glowered at her. She held a smile back, but not well enough. She had almond eyes, a face like a kite. No longer did he recall what his sister looked like, yet he could swear this woman came close in a way no one else did. Many times before, he had thought he saw her in a crowd. Then he'd called after her, then closed in behind her only to have another stranger meet his delight with a bewildered stare. What did he like to call her? Leland sat inside the train later, and it dawned for the first time that he could no longer recall his name for her. He spent much of the following day trying to remember. Then he picked up the next fax, dialed a number, and read. Dispatch 372-683-9714. Greetings. Kira Alem to any among you still out there. As I compose this, preparations are being made for my relocation to Kewelios. The Leira took 20 years deliberating on my request to come live on their lands and have decided in my favor. I am to leave here promptly so I may rendezvous with a phalanx of their scout ships returning from a reconnaissance mission on one of Leiranin's outer worlds. I am told this must be done so I may enter Kewelios' atmosphere under the guise of one of those ships falling unexpectedly from orbit. As I have been made to understand, it is imperative that only a few among the Leira be aware of my presence on Kewelios. It was never the way of the Kiral to hide things from each other, but I recognize the impulse in our progenitors, the Kianen, and I do not wish to challenge it. The Leira have prepared a small island for me in one of their oceans. Seizing on my ability to alter some of my physical appearance, they have approached me with a selection of objects they want me to consider mimicking once on the island. I am partial to something they call an office tower. I have been told there are many like it on Kewelios, and inside them the Leira confine themselves for long hours to justify their needs for sustenance. I find this enthralling in a morbid sense. The few among the Leira who will be aware of my presence on the island intend to study how I am able to adapt to their native environments, and in turn I hope to recover some of what I've lost in my isolation. Kiralim Akiba. The windows around the office began at the ceiling and came down below Leland's knees. At the corner where two of them met, he sat on one of their cold steel ledges and set the fax down. The city outside cast him in a crisp silhouette. A blimp wrapped in neon-tinted advertising crept across both windows. Drones meandered and towers loomed under a half-moon. At 10,000 square feet, the office appeared to him like he was seeing it the first time. He had always gotten off the elevator to an open floor with long desks and glass partitions, but this night he noticed, for the first time, that they were all gone. The floor was empty save the fax machine on a carton in the middle. Beside the carton stood the shredder. Beside that stood his floor buffer. Perhaps there had been plans to move the furniture elsewhere. Perhaps the company renting the space had relocated without notice. He ran the fax through the shredder, sat beside it when he was done. He liked coming up here. He had not received payment for cleaning it in a long time, yet he had not missed a single shift he could recall. Though it was the most tranquil place he entered daily, he had never thought of squatting inside it. he had never seen a soul inside the building itself save him. He could no longer recall how he came into the duty of cleaning its top floor. The more he tried to remember, the muddier things got. Agent Everly had gotten him the job. No, it had been his sister. Was Agent Everly his sister? He fished about in the dark till his hand met the backpack. Across the street, Agent Everly was missing from the diner. Leland had only noticed when his order of coleslaw arrived at their usual booth. He stared across at the empty seat, strained to recall what she looked like. She was his caseworker. She was helping him get back on his feet after a lengthy mental breakdown. No, it did not quite add up in his mind. He had placed the backpack on the table when he came in. He glared now at it, noting how much heavier it felt on his shoulder the last few days. He pulled the zipper back on its main compartment. Tips of shredded paper poked out. Reams of it fell onto the table as he dug his hand in, much more than made sense for how many faxes he had run through the shredder, how many he recalled running through it. Leland got up and stumbled out into the night. He found a bus stop beside the building and laid on its bench. Sleep's embrace found him in turn, for the first time in who knew how long. The building's monolithic silhouette loomed over him, lulled him. Something had been taken from him, and he no longer knew what. Tomorrow evening he would read the next fax, and Agent Everly, he assured himself, would be waiting inside the diner when he was through. Dispatch 372-683-9857. To the Corral. However many among you may still be out there, drifting as I have been all these years. Kira Alim. This will be my final attempt to re-establish the relay we once kept between each other, thanks to Kira's divine sequence. All previous attempts appear to have found no Kiral on the other end, and I fear my new host, the Leira, may not welcome any further attempts politely once I am on Keralios. Though in our time we never learned to move about at a velocity faster than light, our relay method employs a superluminal discharge. The power grids on Keralios are presently ill-equipped to be around. I am now en route to Keralios at 11 million kilometers per hour, expecting to rendezvous with the reconnaissance fleet in 70 days. Part of my reason for sending this last dispatch is to make known a decision that has come to me in the last hour. I have now elected to roam Keralios using the same set of prehensile appendages that the Leira possess, the same neural connections, the same organs. To carry this out, I will begin by sectioning away a fraction of my corporeal aspect and refashioning it into a sequence of molecules impossible to distinguish from the aspect of a common Leira. Then, what is still able to be salvaged of my dilapidated mind, I will possess this new body and await the moment the old one makes planetfall. I have not informed the Leira of any of this, and I have no intention to. They make a habit of hiding things from each other. So, too, must I now hide my new body while also hiding inside it. When the time comes that the agents allowed access to this old husk of stone are not looking, I will slip out, to be lost among the Leira and never found. Kira Alim Akiba. However, if any among you is presently headed here, do not hesitate to find me when you arrive. I will be answering to Leland. Leland felt his knees give while reading the last word on the fax. His butt met the ledge of the window closest to him. He leaned his back against it to keep from crumbling into a lump on the floor as understanding flooded his mind. The elevator dinged loudly at the far end of the office and let out its sole occupant. Leland could barely keep his thoughts in a straight line as he laid eyes on her. Miss Everly. She stroked calmly in his direction. Good evening, Leland. Or should I say, Kiba. Kiba. Kiba lowered its gaze as more understanding flooded in and brought with it memories misplaced over billions of years. Kiba 527-843-929, it mouthed, lifting its eyes to the woman closing toward it. Just Kiba 1 now. Kiba swallowed. It felt strange to do that for the first time in a very long time. Every pore on its imitation human skin demanded its attention at once. Its eyes welled with a strange liquid as it recalled the devastation 2 billion years ago. How did you? It stuttered, then trailed off as the woman came to a stop in front of it. We've been trying to help you remember since we first located you. Prior to this, we came as a next of kin, and we read entries from the collected Chiral histories disguised as novels in effort to jog your memory. Give paid the revelation a half nod. Who are you? We are a composite mind state belonging to some of the remaining Chiral. Your absence at the reunion is felt more each passing millennium. Kiba's eyes filled with something now alien to it, though the accompanying emotion felt like elation. The reunion. The composite extended a hand. Come give us a tour of this structure you converted yourself to while we still have the planet's moonlight to illuminate it. Kiba took the composite's hand and stood. Wait a few hours and we can see it together in daylight. But you have commenced liftoff already, Kiba. Kiba turned and directed its human stare toward the window. The tops of surrounding towers were descendant. It dawned then that the remnant of its mind that had laid dormant inside the building all these years was eager to return home and had been awaiting this reunion of a kind with the remnant that had gone by Leland. The island, Kiba blurred, concerned with the safety of Laira on the ground, as its building-shaped body burned fuel from the thrust kiln below it. It's been evacuated for some time now. Kiba laid its head on the composite's shoulder. Together they watched Leo's drop away from the window's view. Hira Lim, it whispered, then shut its human eyes one last time. Leo's Lim.
The Building Across the Street by R.T. Ester. Thank you very much for that reading. That was great. Every time I go back to it, there's something else, or there's something that kind of still hits in a great way.
Thank you.
It's one of the favorite stories I've published and read in recent years. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Oh.
RT, you have a book coming out later this year from Solaris. Could you kind of tell Interzone pod listeners a little bit about it?
Yeah. Thanks for asking, Gareth. It's called GANYMEDAN, GANYMEDAN. I wanted to make sure I spelled it out because I think I used a very unusual spelling. Yeah. So it's basically a far future setting that mixes space opera and cyberpunk in sort of an idiosyncratic way. The main character is a mixologist who tries to escape Mars after becoming the person of interest in the murder of his very powerful employer, and this was in addition to erasing all his sentience backups. So basically, he isn't able to come back again in a new body. And while the mixologist's main character is trying to escape Mars, he misses his flight and ends up bumming a ride with a sentient spaceship who was actually created by the employer who just died. So of course he doesn't know this about the ship, and also the ship doesn't know he's the main suspect. So it's basically a race against time until the ship discovers who he is and turns him in. But while they're traveling together, they end up having to make a few stops, and each time they do, the story becomes about whether or not the mixologist is willing to kill the ship before it finds out who he is and turns him in, right? So definitely, I would say it's dark sci-fi with some philosophical back and forth, based on my my layperson's understanding of things like utilitarianism, for example. And then there's also stuff in it about the ship basically interrogating its very complex relationship with its maker. Now that he's dead. Like,
Okay.
so yeah, that's it's just a very quick summary without giving too much away of the novel.
That's a really tantalizing summary, though. And you mentioned utilitarianism. What was the kind of moment where you thought, okay, this idea, which I find fascinating, is going to become part of a novel? How did that process work, going from thinking about that idea to turning it into part of a story?
Yeah, well, that honestly came after I gotten the idea for the story. I think that came about when I was just trying to figure out how to distinguish these two main characters from each other. You have the human who is kind of very much what I would call someone who does what he feels is right without waiting to see if it's approved to do that, to do whatever that is.
Uh-huh.
And then you have this ship who is very much you know stays follows its programming basically, to phrase it in that way. And I just basically wanted to see how to really distinguish the two of them from each other. And at some point, I got to thinking about just utilitarianism, I guess, and how that would reflect on their attitudes on what's things that, I guess, injustices that are present in that world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what ends up kind of bringing both of them together in the end.
You seem to be interested in different stories about that kind of mind body, not so much mind, not necessarily mind body connection, but the way that kind of minds can inhabit different bodies, and this kind of distinction. I think about Moon Eel a little bit there, and certainly with the building across the street. What was the kind of inspiration in terms of maybe kind of canonical, I don't like the word canonical, but in terms of kind of the SF canon, or in terms of just your reading, were there any kind of particular sort of things that you were thinking about or that were inspiring for you as you wrote the novel?
Yeah, well, it's been years since I first got the idea for it, but something I think played a big part in just planting the seed for it in my head was the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. And there's that scene in the movie where the astronaut is moving through a sort of crawl space to try to disable Hal, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the genesis of the idea for me. I think initially I just wanted to recreate that visual and maybe write a different story around it. So that's basically what I ended up doing. And I guess along the way I picked up more influences that ended up in the story, as it evolved. The digital afterlife concept, for example, plays a big role in the story. I first encountered it in one of Ian Banks's culture novels. There's actually more Banks influence in it than I like to admit, because it starts making me sound like someone who needs to read another book. The sentient spaceships, the sentient spaceships also came from reading Banks.
Mm-hmm.
I think consciousness backups came from reading him as well. But for this story, I liked how the altered carbon book
Mm-hmm.
used it to create this sort of transhumanist noir, and like also had a group of dissidents who were ethically opposed to it. So if people enjoy stuff like that, it's all here. It's all in the GANYMEDAN, basically. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And as far as like influences on it, yeah, I would say definitely Altered Carbon and a couple of books from the culture universe, Ian Banks's culture universe.
You mentioned Space Odyssey, and how that visual was something that you almost were kind of bouncing off. Is that something that happens when you're writing, that there are sort of filmic or televisual things that you kind of that you're thinking about as you're writing? Are you a kind of visual writer in that sense?
Oh yes, all the time, all the time. A lot of stories that I write start out as just a picture I have in my head of,
Mm-hmm.
or something that I took from something I'd seen. Like, as far as actual writing, it started from just like my interest in design. I think that's where like the seeds from it came out of. When I was growing up, like I said, I wasn't much of a reader, and as far as like writing, I didn't write, but I did keep like I kept like a notebook with just like synopses and for like, just story ideas that I had. I never really expanded on them, and but because of how my mind worked, I sketched a lot of ideas for movie posters as well. So yeah, I would say it's definitely very intrinsically linked to my background as just a designer, as a visual person. A lot of my stories start out as just pictures in my head, and I try to basically just write a story around it, or just like a line someone says to somebody else. I have a couple of stories that started out that way as well. I wouldn't say, I have the experience that a lot of writers have where I know exactly what I want to say before I even start writing. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
never really been my experience so
Right.
it's always just, I have something stuck in my head and I have to get it out somehow. And, so yeah, so basically.
Yeah, and with I remember you mentioning on social media that there was a history book that I either kind of fed into Sleeping Arrangements, your story on Interzone Digital, or maybe was you were reading it around the same time, and I think that really fascinated me. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So that was one example, I think, where I had an idea for a story and I had some of it written out. And at some point, I think it just kind of occurred to me that I needed to, I guess, tie it more to real life historical events, or at least, make sure that it resonates with real life historical events. And so it was around that time that I kind of came across this book, and it was kind of like, I guess, like a happy accident that it was kind of about specific types of people that the main character in Sleeping Arrangement is, which is people who basically go into all this, you know, people who went into like enemy territory and basically try to um, recruit people for the imperial, for the U.S. through through religion basically. And so I always knew that there were people like that, but it was good to just kind of find a book that actually covered the history of it and actually went into a couple of actual people who did that. So yeah.
Right. Oh, that's that. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Thanks again for reading that and for talking about all of those things. Your novel, the GANYMEDAN, is coming out. I think later this year. I think it's fall, right? Autumn 2025.
Yeah, close to the end of the year, yes.
Okay, so people can look out for that, and yeah, they can find After Stasis on Interzone Digital. That's your latest Interzone story, and
Hmm.
they can also find Sleeping Arrangements and The Moon Eel Bennett in Conversation with the Astronaut Who Came Back for It, and of course the story you read today, The Building Across the Street, which is in Interzone 294. Thank you so much, Artie.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to Interzone Pod with me, Gareth Jelley, and my guest today, R.T. Ester. Thanks for listening. See you next time.